If you lived in a medieval English monastery, you would be woken from sleep twice every single night for the rest of your life. The first waking came in the depths of winter darkness, somewhere around 2 in the morning, for the office known as Matins. The day itself was governed by the rule of St. Benedict, a text already centuries old by then, which divided it into 8 fixed points of prayer. Matins was the first of them, and the least forgiving. A bell sounded once through the cloister, and that was the whole of the announcement. There was no second bell, and no one expected one. Brother Thomas slept in his habit, as every monk did, so that rising required nothing but standing. The stone floor was the first thing he felt, and it had not warmed in hours. He had done this so many times that his body now moved before his mind had properly woken. That, more than anything, was the discipline. This was Benedictine life, not a withdrawal from the world's demands, but an immersion in a different set of them, repeated without exception. The monks filed into the church by candle, or by no light at all, feeling their way along walls worn smooth by generations of the same hands. Inside, the cold was worse. Stone held the chill of the night long after the night itself had ended. Breath showed in the air as a pale cloud, the only thing in the church that seemed to move. The night office was sung from memory, in the dark, the chant rising and falling between the choir stalls like something that did not need eyes to continue. It was the longest service of the day, and the one most likely to be missed by a man who had simply fallen back to sleep where he knelt. For another still learning the order of the Psalms, Matins was where mistakes were made, and where an older monk's quiet correction mattered most. By the time Matins ended, there was still no light in the sky. Lauds followed almost immediately, timed to the first grey edge of dawn. Between the two services there was barely a pause, only a slow change in the quality of the dark. After Lauds, the monks returned to the dormitory for what was, by long custom, a second sleep. It rarely lasted more than 2 hours. For Brother Thomas, this second sleep had stopped feeling like rest a long time ago. It was closer to a held breath before the day properly began. By 6, the bell sounded again, and there was no question of further sleep. Frank came at first light, short and practical, more a marker of the day's start than a service in its own right. There was no breakfast to speak of. Most mornings, a monk worked for hours on an empty stomach before the day's first proper food arrived. After prime, the working day began, and for most of the community that meant leaving the church entirely. The rule balanced prayer with labor, a principle the monks called ora et labora, and the labor was never symbolic. Even senior monks were expected to work with their hands. Brother Thomas's morning work depended on the season. In summer it might be the hay, in winter mending tools, or in firewood, or work in the kitchens. The monastery grew much of what it ate, in gardens and fields worked by the brothers themselves alongside hired hands. It kept its own flocks too, and wool from monastic land became one of medieval England's most valuable exports, sold by the sacked merchants who shipped it across the Channel. None of this was incidental to the spiritual life of the house. It was understood as part of it, no less than the Psalms. The abbey brewed its own ale as well, weak enough to drink through a working day, and considered, in an age before anyone understood why, safer than water drawn from open streams. The fields, the flocks, the brewing, the stalls, all of it fell under the cellar, the monk responsible for keeping a self-sufficient community fed, clothed, and supplied through every season. It was a considerable operation, run with the same discipline as the church services, and it left almost nothing to chance. Mid-morning brought terse, a short pause in the working day rather than a true break. The bell called the brothers back to the church for a handful of psalms, then released them again. For the novice, the morning's labor was as much a lesson as the chant had been. He worked beside Brother Thomas, matching the older monk's pace rather than setting his own. There was little instruction in words. Most of what a young monk learned, he learned by watching, and by the quiet correction of a hand placed over his own. By sext, the working day gave way to something quieter, though no less demanding. Sext marked the middle of the day, and was followed at once by the one substantial meal most monks ate. The meal was eaten in complete silence. While the brothers ate, one of their number stood at a raised lectern and read aloud from scripture or another approved text. Conversation at table was forbidden, so anything a monk needed, salt, bread, more water, was asked for with the same hand signs used throughout the cloister. After the meal, those assigned to the scriptorium climbed to a long room lit by whatever daylight the windows allowed, and the afternoon's work began. No candle was allowed near the desks. Ink and parchment burned easily, and the only acceptable light was whatever the sky provided. Brother Thomas had spent the better part of 3 months on a single manuscript, copying it letter by letter on sheets of vellum prepared months before by someone else's hands entirely. Vellum was made from calfskin, scraped, stretched, and dried over weeks until it would take ink without bleeding. A single large book might use the skins of 200 animals. By the time it was bound, a finished manuscript could be worth as much as a working farm, which made every page a small act of risk as well as labor. Partway through the afternoon, the bell called the brothers to none, the shortest service of the day, then released them straight back to their desks. The novice had been given a simpler task nearby, ruling faint lines on a fresh sheet to guide a more experienced hand. It was the kind of work given to those not yet trusted with ink. An inkhorn stood at the edge of his desk, refilled that morning and full to the rim. A sleeve caught it. The horn tipped, and for a moment ink ran freely across the desk toward the sheet Brother Thomas had been working since morning. Brother Thomas did not shout, and he did not reach for the page first. He reached for a cloth and pressed it against the desk's edge, where the ink could still be stopped. The page survived, marked at one corner but legible, and the lost ink amounted to less than an hour's work to clean away. It could have been 3 months. Years earlier, as a novice himself, Brother Thomas had made the same mistake with someone else's page and remembered exactly how it had felt. He said nothing of it now, and went back to work. The light through the high windows had already begun to lean, and by the time it reached the far wall, the scriptorium was closed for the day. Vespers came as that light failed, the service that marked the true end of the working day. Afterwards came a lighter meal, sometimes no more than bread and whatever remained from midday, depending on the season and the calendar of fast days. The last service of the day was compline, said by candlelight, short and quiet, more a settling than a performance. When compline ended, the great silence began, and it would not lift until after Mass the following morning. From this point, anything that needed to be said was said with the hands. The signs covered bread, water, tools, and books, which was, in practice, almost everything that needed saying. The brothers returned to the dormitory in single file, in the same order they had left it some 16 hours before. The dormitory held the same chill it had at 2 that morning, as though the day's warmth had never quite reached it. For the novice, the day had been the first he had managed without an obvious mistake, which was its own small achievement, though no one remarked on it. Brother Thomas lay down in the same bed he had left that morning, in the same habit, under the same thin blanket. Somewhere beyond the dormitory wall, a single candle still burned, the one that was never allowed to go out before morning. In a few hours, the bell would sound again, as it had the night before, and the night before that, and as it would tomorrow. It was not a day with an end. It was a day that simply paused, in the dark, waiting for the bell.